Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you and welcome to Islam and Life with me, Tariq Ramadan, broadcasting from London. In today's show we ask the question, how will the rising right-wing bloc in the EU impact European Muslims?
The last election for the European Parliament witnessed the electing of representatives espousing a wide variety of right-wing views. In 2009, the Europe of Freedom and Democracy bloc was established by UKIP and from 8 other countries, including the Italian Northern League. Marine Le Pen's National Front and Geert Wilders' Party for Freedom in the Netherlands aim to join hands in a new right-wing bloc after the upcoming elections. Many members of this bloc have been outspoken in their attacks on Muslims. Slavi Benev, the Bulgarian MEP, has stated, "If Osama bin Laden symbolizes the cruelest aspect of the Islam for the Americans, then the Muslim woman with her numerous children are his European equivalent." This week on Islam and Life, we ask, how will the rising right-wing blocs in the EU impact European Muslims?
There is a question to be asked around this right-wing bloc that we see now at the European level. This is very worrying. We saw trends within specific countries. We heard, of course, about Geert Wilders in the Netherlands. We heard about the Front National in France. And then we can see now that it's not only something that is happening in specific countries. There is an ideology, there are links, there is a trend where people are coming, and in fact one of the main targets is in fact Islam and the Muslims. It's as if anything which has to do with the Muslim citizens or the European Muslim citizens or the European Muslims is a problem. The more the Muslims are becoming European, or they are British or French, now we have it even of course in the UK with UKIP and making it a problem. So the more there is a sense of belonging, the more it's described as dangerous. And there is a European bloc now and trends making it an issue when it comes to Islam, when it comes to the secular system, when it comes to immigration, when it comes to living together. So what will be the future? The elections are coming, and for the first time there is a sense that this bloc could be quite strong and have quite an influence at the European level. For years, we thought that what is happening in France was an exception. It's as if the reality of the French discourse is now, in fact, colonizing other countries and normalizing a discourse that is targeting the Muslims and Islam. These are critical questions for any British citizen, any French or German or Italian citizen, and for the European citizens. And to answer, or trying to answer all these questions, I'm joined by my guest, Talha Jamil Ahmad, spokesperson for the Muslim Council of Britain. Thank you so much for being with us. It's quite worrying what is happening today at the European level, because first, for years, in fact, even in the UK, we thought it's not going to happen. The UK, it's an open society. At the local level, at the regional level, at the national level, this were a place where it was easy to be a Muslim, at least the visible side, you know, with the dress, the clothes, and I think in the daily life. And it was more difficult in the 80s in France. And it's as if what we heard in France, it's heard now by some politicians in the UK, it's heard in the Netherlands. Recently, Geert Wilders saying there are too many Moroccan people in this country, and being supported by the people for having said that. So how do you see the situation from the UK to the European Union situation?
In the last election, of the 27 nations in the European Union, 14 of them returned at least one far-right extremist or near enough extremist MEP, and that is extremely worrying. That also shows that 13 of them, nearly half of them, did not return a single single far-right MEP, and that's positive. But 14 out of 27 is quite worrying. What is more worrying is that these are not your conventional East European, generally relatively less developed, politically less developed nations. These are all countries across the board, including UK, France, and so on. In the UK this year, it is, although UKIP is expected to do as good, if not better than last year, fortunately BNP, which is more right-wing and more almost bordering fascist, is likely to lose both of their MEP seats. So that's a positive thing, but it is extremely worrying that across Europe we see an increasing visibility of far-right groups. What I found troubling is in the report earlier, we've seen Geert Wilders and the French National Front. They are likely to form a European parliamentary bloc in the next parliament. In the past, what we've seen is that National Front were struggling to find alliances. Even Geert Wilders, who is extremely Islamophobic and so on, were not prepared to enter into alliances with National Front. But now they are, and that is extremely, extremely worrying.
Yes, I think that what you are mentioning here is quite important. What we are seeing is not only a coalition, because there is a coalition, and there is a coalition. You know, Marine Le Pen is in touch with, from France, is in touch with Geert Wilders, who is in touch with the UDC, the Union of the Democratic Center in Switzerland. They are creating a kind of a network at the European level. This is clear, and they are not hiding it. This is something which is known, and they are saying it. What is more important coming from here is at the European level, how much impact do they have on the political discussion? Because it's going beyond them. They are here and there is a bloc, and the question is which kind of impact their presence is going to have on the European Union policies. And what we see is that the traditional parties, socialists or parties on the right-hand side of the political spectrum, are now integrating things that were said by them alone yesterday. And what you said about Marine Le Pen, she was alone, or her father was alone, and now there is a kind of normalization. So this is even more, yes, mainstream. So this is
and
more
I think the danger is in every country, if you look at it, what has happened is you would have thought that the rise of far right would create would ring an alarm bell within the mainstream political parties so that they would take them head on. Instead, what has happened is that we realize, especially in Denmark, for example, and to an extent in Netherlands, what they have done is this extremist element of the society, the far-right element of some of these European societies, whilst they themselves been vilified by media and others, but mainstream politicians, instead of taking them head-on, have taken some of their rhetoric and implemented. In Denmark, for example, they've implemented in law. In this very country, in Britain, for example, what we see is that whilst the mainstream political parties do challenge BNP and vilify them and so on, but we also see that when it comes to Muslim and Islam, government is increasingly taking a harsher stance, a stance which in fact defies the values of this country, and that is extremely worrying. Now, the question is, what influence are they going to have at the European level? I think at legal level, I don't think their influence is going to be much, because even the European Parliament itself do not really have much of a teeth in terms of making policies and so on. But what it does give them is these groups within individual nations, they're very small and cannot really find much space. But at the European level, they can muster 80, 100, even 150 MEPs. What this gives them is funding, which they desperately need from the European Union. It gives them a voice and it gives them a platform. So they can raise their views with more prominence, with more rigor, with more visibility. And that obviously strike a chord with some section of the wider society who are not necessarily racist, who are not necessarily extremists, but are otherwise disappointed with the mainstream political parties, and they find their voices being heard and responded to by these. So at the lawmaking level, I think at the day-to-day policy-making level, I am not sure that they will have huge impact yet. But in terms of increasing the hostility towards Muslim, in terms of increasing hostility in the political debate, I think they sure will have a huge impact.
Yes, but I think that this is an important point. At the same time, what you said is important. It's now, we would have expected that the traditional party will neutralize them which now it's not happening. It's the other way around, normalizing.
I think one of the problems we have is increasingly media plays a very powerful role in shaping public perception. And politics from 30 years ago, when it was about ideas and ideologies and beliefs and passions, so political parties, no matter how unpopular their views are, if they had conviction in it, they will try to drive and persuade people into it. From that point, what we have now is politicians often would engage PR gurus who would analyze what would sell well with people, and then they would formulate their rhetoric and their policies in line with what is likely to be approved by people.
But yes, but it's quite clear. The far-right parties and the populists are selling well.
Yeah, so what happened is now, because of that, mainstream political parties are not willing to hold on to the strongly held convictions that they historically championed. Instead, they're concerned about success at the polling station, so they're increasingly watering down their policy and ideological narrative and increasing their appeal to a wider mass. And I think that is extremely worrying. But I was talking about the media, and I think the problem with the media is that because they like dramatizing, they like a story, they like a drama, they like, if you like, a thrill and excitement. And in doing so, what they do is, instead of looking at the substance and engage with the subject matter intellectually in an objective manner, they often blow it out of proportion. And Muslim being the newest arrival in Europe, Muslim being lacking a political voice, Muslim being disunited, because when you talk about Muslim community, we're not talking about a coherent, harmonized community. We're talking about people of all colors and shades and views and background. So they are the easiest of target. And that, how do we deal with them, obviously, is a different matter, and it's a very complex issue.
It's a complex issue. Now, what is important is what could be the reaction to this, because the media are doing the natural job. You know, news are when things are going bad and when there are controversies. And with Muslims, every other week you have a problem. You can speak about school, you can speak about the headscarf, you can speak about the niqab, you can speak about the minarets. So you have lots of, even halal meat and praying outside on, in the streets. You have, and not to speak about violence and extremism. So these are topics that we can see. What could, and the populists are using this, and the media are covering this because this makes money and it sells quite well. What could be the reaction, that should be the reaction of the European Muslims? You are, the spokesperson for a national organization. You are involved in the national debate, and this is very important. What would be your advice at the local level, the national level, and the European level?
I think one of the biggest danger that we face in Europe as Muslim, as a faith community, is that wider population still, despite our huge presence and visibility, and despite so much coverage of Muslim issues, the wider population do not really understand what Islam stands for, the fundamentals of Islam. So, and there have been many research which looks into this, and they found again and again that people who despise and sympathize with far-right views often do not know much about Islam. So one of the critical role that Muslim has to play is how do we go and reach out to these people in terms of educating them about Islam. The second issue that we need to focus on is that our aspirations are very similar to aspirations of an ordinary European, in that we want good schools, we want good houses, we want good jobs. But somehow wider society, or at least a good fraction of the wider society, seems to think that no, that is not our aspiration. Our aspiration is to create bombs and take over countries, which in fact is not an aspiration shared by Muslims. Now, how do we get over it? And all of that points to one area, and that is this. We need serious investment within our communication strategies and within our dawah strategies. When I say dawah, I don't mean propagating Islam to convert them. What I mean is raising awareness about Islam and Muslims. And that is an area that we are not investing. Our focus, even in Britain, where we have mostly second, third generation of Muslims, immigrant Muslims, we still are focused more into giving charity to foreign projects, giving charity to worthy causes, but nevertheless causes which are far away and distant from this country. But we need to change that. We need to focus more in building a better future for us by building institutions which are able to undertake research, by building institutions which are able to put our point across. Muslim Council of Britain, for example, what it aspires to do is not so much talk about the concerns of Muslims abroad, but focus more about the challenges that we face in this country and how can we create a confident community, confident British Muslim community that can contribute positively. But that requires investment, and that means our community, individuals, institutions, businesses, they need to take this seriously because it affects us all. And taking seriously means investing our money and resources and time.
And what would you say to people saying, you know, and you have this coming from the populists, be careful with these people because they know how it works now. So they are playing the game. They are becoming more citizens. They are playing. They are more visible. They speak our language. But in fact, you know, this is something that have been facing for years. They have a double speech. They have a double agenda, what they want. And the more you are, so to speak, integrated, the more you become dangerous, and the more you are proactive, the more suspicious you become. So what is the strategy
Which
here?
is why I think it's not just good enough to get involved in the system and do well and be part of it. What is more important is that, yes, you do all of this, because if you're not part of the system, if you're not part of the society, how do you reach out? How do you speak? How do you understand them? But what is more important is to blend in a way that enables us to develop relationship, for example, with the wider population. Now, how do you develop relationship? It's not about just meeting them in professional capacity occasionally. It's about socializing and getting involved with the day-to-day life of the wider society, but also having a very developed and sophisticated communication strategy, which really looks at the heart of how do we convey our message, our aspiration, and our desires to the wider society, and is it being effective? And that again brings back to the idea that we really need to invest in it as a matter of priority so that our institutions, mosque, local groups to national bodies, they're equipped to undertake the research, to undertake the media work, to undertake other outreach work which raises the profile of the wider community.
That's fine. We can try, even though it's quite difficult at the national level. If it comes to the European level, and we are talking here about the EU, where many people, and this is in fact what is very powerful with the populists. They don't trust the European
Muslims.
No, not the Muslims. The populists. They don't trust the European institutions. They are saying these people are taking power from us at the national level. So they are there, in fact, to create this connection, to come back to their respective country and to build this strong discourse and rhetoric against the Muslims.
One of the problems EU has and the European establishment has is, as a student of law in my going back a few years, I studied the democratic deficit within the European institution. And I think in the last 5, 6, 7 years, this hasn't changed a huge lot. So European institution has a huge task in terms of educating their own people that ultimately they can make a difference. And I think from that perspective, it is actually a positive thing that people are able to send MEPs to Europe who we may not necessarily like, but people think that they have a power. Because at the national level, if you take UK, for example, whilst UKIP has been so successful at the European election, they have had no luck within the local and the national election. And that frustrates their supporter, because if they're able to turn around 9, 10, 11 MEPs and they are not able to get one single MP, somehow people feel that the institution and the system that they have in this country conspire against them. And that gives a sense of, if you like, victimhood, and that creates a greater degree of anger. So I think the elections which returns far-right extremists, I don't welcome it, but in a way it provides a channel for some of these people to express their anger. But European Union and the other European project really need to look very carefully as to how do they communicate. Also, I think at the very top level of the EU, they have a greater responsibility to champion the causes of the ethnic minorities, especially Muslim community, in the sense that they really need to come out championing the Muslim cause, not so much for love of Islam and Muslim, but more so to protect the European values of freedom, of democracy, of justice, of equality. And if
but you would agree with me that it's the opposite that is happening now. If you look at what is happening, and you are quite right, they don't have a very important presence at the national level, so they have a platform at the European level. Look at what is said about Turkey. Look at what is at the end, the Turkish presence. At the end, migrants, and what is happening in Lampedusa, where is the way we are. And this is something which is very worrying. So this platform is giving them a voice where at the end they have an impact.
I think one of the missing puzzle in this jigsaw is the wider academia and the policy-making elites, where this debate has been broadly absent. We have not seen the serious investment in academic research and policy-making research. I'm not talking about political parties and their policy-making arms. I'm talking about civil society institutions, which ultimately shapes the intelligentsia of a nation. And I think they haven't looked into this area deeply enough. And Muslim has a duty to make sure that we put the funding and the right talents who goes into this area and engage at an intellectual level with the academics and other intellectuals. What that would do is that it would develop an intellectual understanding which may not necessarily filter down to the wider masses as of yet, but it will create, if you like, a safeguard at the policy-making level where mainstream political parties would be less tempted than they are now in going for short-term gains. And I think ultimately the point we have to make very forcefully with evidence and with research is that if you go down the route of draconian measures against Muslims, it is not good for anybody. Yes, it is harmful to Muslims, but it is also harmful to the society that we know of. And if we can make that case, I think ultimately Europe will get its voice. But I think the point I really want to make is this. The reason why these attacks are getting sharper and more visible is because they feel that Muslims are excelling in this country. And that is a positive thing, because what it means is that we are having some success. And if we carry on, I'm sure we can face this challenge.
Thank you so much. I think that it's quite important what you said at the beginning when it comes to the European Union, to understand first that there is a network, and this is quite worrying because we can see that people have a voice, have a platform, and that it's also helped in a negative way by the media that are making stories and nurturing controversies at that level. While at the national level they are less present maybe, and they have less power, still what we see is that this has an impact on the European Union policy, and what the Muslims, and not only the Muslims, and you said it many times, is that their fellow citizens should understand that anything that is going to have an impact on Muslims will have an impact on the European Union. And in fact, this reconciliation between the European Union and their own values when it comes to living together and this pluralism, and what you are saying is that people should understand that we have to invest, that it has to do with study, with research, within academia, within the media, and also within the society, to help the people to understand that in the future we have to be much more involved in this discussion, and this would be the way to resist anything which has to do with populism. Well, that's all we have time for. Please let us know your thoughts and views on any of the shows you have seen, and here is the way to contact us.
We at Islam and Life would like to hear your views about the subjects that we discuss. We would also love to hear your suggestions for our program, so get in touch with us. You can also share your thoughts with other Islam and Life fans, engage in debate, and find out how to watch our previous shows. Follow us on Twitter at Islam and Life TV, or join us on Facebook by liking our page Islam and Life on Press TV.
Finally, I would like to thank my guest, Talha Jamil Ahmad. Thank you so much for your presence and your insight. And I hope to see you next week, inshallah.